All right, tonight we've got the preeminent chaos magician Lionel Snell with us, aka Ramsey Dukes. He's got a new YouTube channel that we want to talk about, and his latest book out is called My Years of Magical Thinking. I've heard him on one of our favorite podcasts, Rune Soup, and we've also had Gordon White on before. It's been a topic that we've been wanting to explore more, so we're really happy to have you on from halfway across the world. Lionel, thanks for coming on the show. Good morning.
Good morning. Hi. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much. Like I said, we've been wanting to explore this more. I've been interested in this magic and chaos magic and the occult more and more these days, and I don't know, I feel like there's a resurgence of it, and I'm not sure if that's just because I'm focusing on it more or if there really is more interest. But like Darren and I were just mentioning to you, we are new to this. We haven't explored it too much. A little bit of a background on what your take on magic is for the layman. We can't start dipping too deep into the waters right now because we're sort of green.
Well, you said something which is valuable to me. You said you get the impression there's more of it around.
Yeah.
Now, my book was very much My Years of Magical Thinking was very much about that, because particularly in the 90s, I think it was probably when they had the decade of evangelism and all that.
Okay.
You got a lot of articles appearing in papers like The Guardian and The Independent and those sort of papers saying, what's happened to the Enlightenment? We've had 500 years of sort of rationalism and proper education and so on and so forth. Why have people seem to be, interested in astrology and tarot and all this mumbo jumbo? What's gone wrong? Why are people going back to that stuff? And well, I think that I see magical thinking as post-scientific rather than pre-scientific. I point out in the book that the Enlightenment was a rediscovery of the sort of values of ancient Greece, the classical values of rationalism, the philosophers and explaining the world and democracy and all those elements. And that actually lasted for 5 centuries. And then you had the Roman era, which was a huge resurgence of magical thinking. A lot of the things now, like astrology, alternative healing, pantheism, all these things, that they had their first big flowering was in the Roman era, divination, all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And so it's almost as though after 500 years of rationality, mankind needs something else. And I could feel that myself because I was brought up in the 50s, which really was a high point of sort of logical positivism and rationality, that religion didn't vanish, but, it was just a thing you did sociably on Sunday, and the real explanations were all, you go to a scientist who really want to know what's going on. And yet, and I had a education, I was a mathematician and had a rational education, and yet I grew increasingly interested in magic. And so what I thought in this book is, now people tend to address this in 2 ways. One is they sort of show that in times of uncertainty, people fall back on old comforting ideas and that sort of stuff, in other words, explaining it away. And the other is to say, it's because of a great spiritual resurgence, and we're entering the age of Aquarius.
Yeah.
And instead, I said, well, look, I'll just explain the things that impacted my thinking over my lifetime and why I became interested in magic and, what the things were that caused that.
Yeah, well, I think there's a bigger issue as well that it just doesn't seem to be working. I mean, the materialism, the dogma that we're surrounded by, that's sort of running our institutions, and it's sort of trying to shape our world isn't really working. And I think people are realizing through direct experience that there's something greater to this.
Yeah, and
or
I
at the
think
very
also
least something missing.
Yeah, something missing.
Yeah, people need something greater because. Funny enough, I mean, our brains are bigger than the universe, our minds are, because, for instance, the scientists will say the Big Bang is their theory, you say, what happened before the Big Bang?
Yeah.
And they said there was no before.
Exactly.
Time began then.
Yeah.
It's meaningless to talk about before the Big Bang.
Yeah.
But it isn't meaningless because my brain knows what it's saying.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
You go back and you go a minute earlier, and it's a minute before the Big Bang.
You can't just start from somewhere in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. So, in other words, my imaginal world is already twice as big as the universe, because I can picture the whole thing, and I can picture before the Big Bang. So, yeah, it's a sort of claustrophobia. Now, how do people react to that claustrophobia? And I think I put this in when I spoke to Gordon White on the his podcast.
Yep.
I gave the example of when I was in a really seriously boring job in a great big office, and I was going mad, with boredom, and the measure of how bad it was is that I wouldn't have a crap in the morning because I would go into the office for something to do. At some point in the morning I could go to the loo. So I mean, it was that bad. But there was this old guy behind me who spent all his time at his desk looking through travel brochures, and he would have a fortnight's holiday in January, and he'd spend the rest of the year telling us all about it. And we all laughed at him and thought he's a bit simple, But I said, no, actually, I admire that because this job is driving me crazy. But he just has that other world, wherever he goes to Bali or something, and that keeps it going the whole year.
Yeah.
He doesn't go mad like me. So I think that's one way that people treat their magic. It's like to give them another reality. And it might be that they're Harry Potter fans, and they buy the cloak and they do this, that, and the other, and they go and enact Harry Potter games and so on and so forth. Or it might be that they, more like the Lovecraftian, they talk about, the great old ones of behind the time and, outside time and all that sort of thing. But they have this other world which sustains the world they're in. Now, the funny thing for
Dungeons
me is
and Dragons.
yeah, that's it. Sort of, the great powerful forces underneath all this that we can't measure. But you see, it didn't work for me because if I did what that guy did and went on a holiday, I love holidaying in France or somewhere. When I come back, it just makes the ordinary life seem even duller. If anything, it was sort of degrading my ordinary existence. And so what I have done in my magic is to sort of look very closely at the world around me and, as it were, find the cracks in the concrete where the flowers push up. I look for things that lead me to see magic around me. One example was I wrote a book, The Little Book of Demons. And I began not with a great statement about, there's this other dimensions and mysterious beings, demons who are affecting us. I said, when the office copier has this annoying habit of breaking down just when you're most busy, how does it know to break down at that point? Now, I said, people who think things like that think, oh, don't be stupid, of course it can't know. But I said, actually, that's a very natural way for a human to think, to put their mind into the thing and make it come to life. And I traced that back to, I said, imagine a little kid sitting on his high stool, and he pushes a spoon to the edge of the table and crash, it drops to the floor. And it does it every time. And so he's actually doing science. He's learning sort of, what things are repeatable and what happens. And another repeatable thing is his mother will come and pick it up and put it back. But the interesting thing is that mother doesn't work as well as the spoon, because sometimes she's a bit bolshy about it, and sometimes she takes the spoon and washes it before putting it back. Something's wrong there. And now there's two things he could do. One is to just think that the mother is a bit more complicated than the spoon. He's got to find out how to push her buttons and make her work. Or else he says, what if there's another me inside my mother? I can feel bolshy at times. Perhaps she's feeling bolshy like me. And so you're sort of putting your mind out into the world. You're like, in religious terms, you're trading your soul. You're giving it a bit of your soul and saying, what would my soul do if it was inside that? Now, that actually leads to a very important part of magical thinking. You look at the weather and it looks as though it's in a bad mood. And you sort of think, feels like thunder coming on. Or the market trader talks about the market being really nervous today and things like that. Now, if anyone says, what? Do you think the market is actually feeling nervous? You'll say, no. But actually, it's a powerful way of thinking. A lot of very good decisions are made by that, and some bad ones, of course. But and what I argued is that the part of our brain which does mechanical causality thinking is actually much smaller than the part of our brain which socially interacts. And so, in a way, the scientific method is a sort of dumbing down. Whereas if we put our mind out into the world and talk to the trees and talk to the fairies, things like that, we're actually using more of our brain. And that's partly why it begins to feel good. And you begin to get rather interesting results if you do that. So that's the sort of a long story, but it's my approach to magic. You look at some of the ordinary things in the world and you begin to say, that's a bit mysterious, that.
Yeah, I liked how you talked about your evolution and your stages of thinking through the years, and how you ended up, in the end, you ended up appreciating the little things in life. Like, that's kind of where magic led to this fascination of just, whatever your, normal daily life thing is.
Yeah, I think a very good exercise for someone who's a gardener is to explore talking to the fairies about your gardening. So, you've bought a pot plant and you're going to put it out in the garden somewhere.
Or in a tent.
You say, I got to ask the fairies where to plant it. Now, what sort of answer do you expect? Now, if you are a brilliant psychic, you might hear a little voice saying, put it over under the tree. But if you think about it, these fairies are from a sort of, we're another dimension or something. How could they communicate? Well, all you could do is to sort of say, where should this plant be best put so it is happy and grows well? And then just listen. And when I say listen, I mean listen with all your faculties. Yeah. Open your eyes, be fully aware.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is that, and it works differently for different people, very often a sort of answer emerges.
Yeah.
And it might be a sort of, a glow over under the tree, and you realize that's what it's saying to go. Or it might be just the thought coming onto mind, I think over by the tree. Now, the rational part says, oh, I made that up. It just came out of my brain. And then you can stop it happening. But if you actually trust it and say, is it true under the tree? Yes. Okay, I'm going to plant it there. You begin to find that this ability gets better and better. Mm-hmm. The answers come quicker. And very often after you've done it, you can understand, there's very good reason for it. Oh, yes, under the tree, just the right amount of shade, and the soil here is very good and everything. I suppose my brain must have worked that out. But actually, you begin to get answers which are quite surprising. And, you wouldn't have known that could happen. So it's like, I always feel that the problem with magic is you've got to allow it to happen. And the rational education we have says, doesn't allow it to happen. So you actually have to sort of be kind to yourself and say, let's allow this to happen, and trust it. And then it isn't that you're throwing away your reason. People say, oh, that's the route to madness. Reason is what holds us together. It's what's made the world. It's just the order you do it in. The rationalist way is you say, well, I'm not going to try this because it clearly can't work. It's absurd. The magical way is to say, I'm going to do this and see what results I get. Then you can look at the results and see if they're good results. In other words, if it says you should plant the tree by chucking it over the neighbor's hedge, then you say, well, that's pretty stupid, whereas if it says put it there and you realize this actually is a good place for it, then you say, well, I'm getting good results. And then you build on that and they get better and better. And that's really how it goes. You use your reason after you get a result.
So would that
you do a tarot reading. You do a tarot reading and then you say, well, was that a good reading? What did it do? How did it help me? And if it helped you, that's a good reading and you go with it.
So would that be the same sort of skill set that the people back in the day, and I guess maybe today to some extent, the guys that can kind of, you count on to always find the water, or, they know where to dig the hole to find the village water and stuff like that. I've seen a special on guys like that.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's that because if you study dowsing, and I'm not brilliant at it, but I have done it in the past. Well, first of all, you've got to go with the thing, do I feel stupid going on with a forked twig walking across a field? What will the neighbors think? But if you do it, you get results. And you usually start off following instructions carefully. Get a twig and hold it this way and all that sort of thing, or get the pendulum. And then people say, is it yes when it goes this way and no when it goes that way? And basically, you're just designing a language. Now, people who've done it a lot, they don't really need that. Very often they can just sort of walk across the field and sense it. They've tuned up their senses to the point where they don't need an instrument to guide them. And that's actually something in magic. A lot of people who've been thinking magically and living magically for a long time, they don't actually do a lot of spells. And I've said this sometimes, when I've spoken to a group of witches or something, I said, sometimes the more you've been in magic, the less magic you actually do. And quite a few heads nod. It becomes a sort of way of life where you may begin by wanting power to make changes, the sort of Crowley, the art and science of causing change in conformity with will. Mm-hmm. But when you get that sort of holistic feel about the world and all that, you begin actually to sort of rather dig things the way they are. And experiences which you might have shied away from, you actually say, this is life. It's actually quite interesting. And going back to my book, The Little Book of Demons, I give one example, which I'm sure some people will say, well, that's medically terribly wrong. But I say depression is a state. And I know there is a clinical depression as a full thing, and it's very serious. But a lot of people just get depressed and they will take a tablet or something to get out of that state or go to a doctor. But I'm a melancholic person, and I've learned to quite enjoy that experience because I've lived long enough to know that it's usually over in a day or two. That's the way my depression works. I can feel absolutely dead to the world, but if it's a sunny morning the next day and I'm feeling full of hope, it's all gone. So it's like being visited by a sort of rather boring old friend. And you realize it's one of the oldest friends you've got, because this goes right back to your childhood. I can remember as a little lonely kid, getting this feeling. And wow, no one's been with me as much as it has. So it's sort of, you get to a state where a lot of the things that happen in this world are so interesting. You don't so much want to change them as to find a new way to relate to them. And so magical thinking tends to lead me into that direction, and quite a lot of other people.
What about what you need to do for work to get to that state? Like I pictured, having to be like, you need a presence of mind or having to be present in the moment to even catch that stuff. Like, what if I'm so distracted and my thoughts are all over the place? Like, don't I need to be somewhat grounded or somewhat aware of what's going on, like, because it's hard to get like that, especially nowadays with all the distractions.
Well, I've something which is very sort of fundamental to me to expanding one's magical awareness has emerged under the name of mindfulness. Now I know that's a term that goes back to sort of Buddhism or something, but a lot of people now who would be very cynical about tarot reading, astrology, and all that, still practice mindfulness as a sort of psychological exercise. Now, I wrote a book called How to See Fairies, which was based on a course I did online, which I called, what was it? Clairvoyance for the non-clairvoyant or something. Basically, it was exploring clairvoyance for people who don't think they're psychic. Yeah, maybe clairvoyance for the non-psychic or something like that.
Yeah.
And what I do is I say at the beginning of it, how do you know you're not psychic? And I give them a series of exercises, which really is just about increasing your sensitivity. And the first one I do, which I once went to a workshop back in the 70s, and the guy demonstrated this, I say, put on a record in your room, piece of music you like, say, and then answer this question: does it sound better when you're standing up or lying down? Now, the rational mind says, well, that's nonsense, it's the same piece of music. But you say, now here you see you've got a hold on the rational mind, because you say there must be a difference, because I'm in a physiologically different state when I'm lying down and standing up, and we know enough about stereo to know acoustically there should be a very slight difference between those two states. So I go back to that question: does it sound better when you're standing up or lying down? And then, does it sound better when you're standing on a head or whatever? Now, the point is there that the rational mind does its thing of stepping in and saying, oh, this is mumbo jumbo, and you say, no, it isn't, because there's a rational difference. The only thing is, can you detect it?
Yeah.
And I suggest one or two similar things, like wine tasting. You buy this wine and he sort of says a naughty wine with a tingling taste of this, that, and the other, and suggestions of flint and strawberries and this, that, and the other. And part of your brain says, geez, that's a lot of rubbish, But this guy makes his living doing that. So there must be something in it. Can you detect these things? And so what you're doing is you're sort of turning up your sensitivity in a way that your rational brain didn't allow you to do. Mm-hmm. And then, having done that a bit, I go into things like, now go into the garden and find your spot. And people say, what do you mean, my spot? And I say, well, think of it like this. Imagine this is a garden party and you've arrived early and someone hands you a glass of wine, and what do? Well, you feel a bit embarrassed, waiting for other people to turn up. So you tend to sort of wander around the garden pretending to look at the flowers and things. And typically you end up somewhere where you feel comfortable, and then you wait. And I said, what you've done, without admitting it, is you found your spot. So just do it in that spirit. Go into the garden, just wander around, not looking for something or saying, what am I looking for? Just wander around until you feel, here's a nice spot, and stand there. And you found your spot. And you see, again, you're doing something which isn't totally irrational, but it's beginning that way. How can one have a spot in the garden? And so you're gradually pushing those boundaries. And then I lead the person to, experiment with a pendulum, and then the tarot and so on and so forth. But basically, I'm showing how to learn to put aside that rational bit, which says, this isn't worth doing, I'm not going to do it because it's stupid, and say, instead focus on whether it works, whether you get something interesting. And then afterwards you can reason about it if you like, but get that result first. So, now, one of the exercises I give at the beginning, someone who reviewed my book said this is the best ever exercise in mindfulness. And that's the first time I'd heard it used that term in the modern sense. And what it is, I said, if you sit in a chair and open up all your senses, first listen intently, then look intently, then smell intently, then taste in your mouth, then feel the chair. Mm-hmm. Now try to do it all together at the same time. And it's actually quite difficult. Very quickly, you're thinking of something. Oh my God, I've drifted off thinking about the bill I've got to pay or something like that, or the meal I've got to cook. It's very difficult. And I said, instead doing it when you're going for a walk. Go for a walk in some pleasant, quiet place and stop your mind from thinking. You look at a gate and the word gate comes to your mind. You say, no, don't do that. Just observe, just feel all the sensations of the walking, the smells, the sounds. Just feel it as pure sensation, as if you've only just landed on this earth and you've never seen any of it before. And don't give it words, don't explain anything. Now, what happens, again, like when you're sitting, is after a while you realize you're walking along and you're thinking of something else. Now, the difference here is that you can think back, when was the last time you were fully awake? What did you see? And you can make yourself walk back to that place. And when you're walking back, you do the same thing. You're keeping yourself fully awake. And you may not actually get back before your mind's wandering again, but you then turn around and may go back. In other words, the difference here is that whereas you're sitting in a chair, you just have to keep saying, oh, stupid, try to start again. In this walking meditation, there's a definite point you try to get back to. And it's like discipline. And it's actually, if you practice that a bit, it's much more powerful. It's a better way of getting into that mindfulness, because you've got this sort of physical discipline. You're forcing yourself to turn around and go back to the last time you were fully awake. And it worked really well for me. And as I say, the person who reviewed the book said, this is the best ever exercise in mindfulness. And I thought, I found my niche.
Yeah, that's good advice. I found mindfulness very powerful. That's kind of what I was thinking of when I asked the question is what are some tools to get to practice being in that state? So yes. What about the title of your book, Magical Thinking? Like, was that because that phrase is also used in the skeptical sense as well as a very negative connotation, telling somebody, you're magical, that's magical thinking, and as a slight. Yes. Now, did you do that just to deliberately change that?
I did actually. Yeah, I know what you mean about the sort of, it's downgraded magical thinking, because I'm a bit pissed off with Wikipedia. Yeah. Because if you look up magical thinking Wikipedia, there's all this about, all the psychological stuff and it's crazy and all that. Now, I put in a reference in their format to my book, SSOTBME, and I said, in which the author suggests that magical thinking may have a positive role to play in our life. Yeah. And it was there for a while and then it vanished.
Exactly.
So, it was like it had been expunged, the very idea that it might have a positive role. So when as I say, I wrote that book with a view to answering these people who say, what the hell's happened to, the Enlightenment? I had in mind a sort of Guardian reader type of readership. And I knew that if I sort of gave it a title like How to Discover Your Magic or something, they wouldn't open it. Yeah. But if I called it My Years of Magical Thinking and began it as almost like a confessional, look, I had a Russian education, but now I write about magic. How did I get to that state?
Exactly.
Some of them might read it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah. So anyway, that's
magic right there.
Yeah. And so the shame about it was that I wasn't really writing for my own audience, where I had in my other books. I was trying to write for some people who, and so in some ways it repeats quite a lot of the things in my other books, but it does put it all together, into one sort of solid argument. And that was it. I was sort of I talk about thinking magically, and that sort of thing, and then how it leads into the discovery of magic. So yeah, I very deliberately did choose that.
Yeah. So what do you have any questions, Darren, about this, or do you want me to continue on?
I'm wondering if there's any ways I can, other than I'm going to try that mindful meditation, because I'm terrible at that sort of thing. And I'm
give it a go.
It kind of almost visualizes it a little bit in a sense. But I was wondering if there's other, I kind of do the affirmation thing. I'm not really steadfast with it. It's kind of off and on.
Affirmations?
Yeah, once I'll do it for a couple of days and I'll forget for 2 months and I'll try it again.
Yeah. Yes.
But is there any other sort of day-to-day magic that I can be, dabbling in without too much risk or?
It's it's the struggle with normality has got such inertia that it just flows back. And something like, using an affirmation. Now, I used to, I love gadgets, and the 80s was a great time of yuppie gadgets, little things you carried with you that did things or felt nice or whatever, and of course the iPhone is the ultimate yuppie gadget like that. But one of the things I experimented with was a little thing like a sort of what do you call it, like a pager, a little thing you could clip onto your pocket or your belt, and you could set it for a certain time and it would vibrate. And so they said it's all very well having a think positive or something like that, but you soon forget to think positive and you go back. Whereas if you set this thing that every 15 minutes it's going to vibrate and remind you to think positive. And that was quite interesting. It worked up to a certain extent. And so some sort of trick like that can be, one way of getting around of it.
That's a good idea.
If you don't, I suppose you could set your iPhone to do that. Yeah.
I have an alarm that comes on and it says breathe deep, and I usually ignore it. That's the problem.
Yes. That's it. It's got to do something a bit irritating, like vibrate. Now, someone the other day was telling me, we're in our 70s, we're getting old, and we begin to find we're losing our sense of balance. Now, my wife has a funny sort of little wobble board thing which you stand on, and it's got one of those puzzles where balls roll around a maze, and you have to tip it to get the balls to get into the center. And the idea of this thing is you stand on it and you put a ball in the maze, and you have to be so good with your balance that you just tip it gently to get the ball to go. And it's a big ball and there's a sort of thing at your feet, and you get it to go to the center. And that's a tremendous exercise in balance. And I said to this person, have you got one of those? He said, yeah, I have actually, but I haven't used it for ages. It's in the cupboard somewhere. And I said, you should do it for 5 minutes every day. And he said, yeah, I should. And I said, it's no good saying that because you won't. I said, the thing to do is to force yourself by linking it to something else that you do every day. And my suggestion was put it in the bathroom and don't let yourself brush your teeth unless you're standing on that thing and practicing it. As an example of sort of making the habit link up to something which you already automatically do.
Yeah.
So it might be, so you think your positive thing, whatever it is, the thing you just said, think it somehow into some part of your life. I know one time, years and years ago, I got a job in France picking green almonds from a tree. in the sunshine, absolute bliss, up a ladder, wearing just swimming trunks and just sort of reaching up for these green almonds with a great big basket and filling one basket after another. It was a lovely sort of repetitive thing in nice surroundings. And what I did is I told myself that, Lionel, every tree has got one magic almond. It's incredible. It's an amazing almond. Okay, what's different about it? Is it different color? No, it's nothing like that. It looks just the same as all the others. Is it different weight? No, it's just the same. Well, how will I know when I find? You'll know if you really pick it up. You'll know it's the magic almond. And so I sort of forced myself to believe that. And so I picked in a state of huge awareness, looking out for the one magic almond. Now, you see, that's a sort of a trick, but that's the sort of trick that you could try out. You might sort of, I don't know, something you do regularly, switching on your apparatus. I saw that, the image of you all sitting in front of all that equipment. You might sort of say, there's a demon in this equipment, and unless I'm aware as I switch everything on, it's going to make it break down. Sort of a little ritual, if you like that, and sort of believe that I'm never going to switch on the electric switch without being fully conscious of what I'm doing. Trickery like that. Yeah, it's
funny because that's almost what they're calling biohacking these days. They're talking about they're calling it in this language like biohack sleep, like to biohack exercise, like put your exercise clothes out right where you get up in the morning and you'll put them on, and like the little tiny tricks, like tricking yourself to create better habits.
It's like in Scott Adams' book, remember? His trick for eating healthy was to just cook up a bunch of healthy food and have it in the fridge, so it's easier than everything else.
Like little things like that, which is really just smart behavior. But what would you suggest? Like if Darren was to put, like let's say he wanted to delve into this a little bit more, and he wants to put he wants to set an alarm on his phone for every 15 minutes or a half hour. What would be something that you would suggest as a practice to start bringing more awareness around this?
I'm going to come to that, but I'm just going to say I'm delighted what you said about this biohack thing, because it's another example. You see, things which I have thought of and had to explain to people, and then they sort of smirk and think, well, that's funny. Yeah. People are thinking like that. What so some people thought was my weird way of thinking actually seems to be the mood of what's happening.
Exactly.
And I'm well cut off from things, so that's really exciting for me when you describe that.
Oh, there's a whole community around it of just tricking themselves to be healthier or to bring awareness. And I mean, and it's a very spiritual movement as well, which is interesting. So,
but because you see, it's going back to that thing of having a two-way conversation with the world.
Yes,
You're sort of telling the world what to tell you. You're saying, "Hey, I'd like to be reminded." Now, I'm getting absent-minded in my old age. I get into the car and find, I've left the car keys in the place I put them specially, so as I go out, I won't forget to pick them up. Now, one thing to do about that is, the chaos magicians, you create a servitor. Now, what I have is a butler, James. Jeeves. Jeeves. I had two butlers. So Jeeves is one. I get in the car. I reach, and I tell Jeeves off. Jeeves, I've asked you to remind me as I go past to take the key. I'm sorry, sir. I apologize. So Jeeves, don't do it again. Very good, sir. So Jeeves. Now the thing is, that's a nice idea, isn't it? But you have to go through with it. When I get in the car and I've got everything there and I've remembered everything, I thank Jeeves. Thanks, Jeeves. That was great. In other words, people get some sort of idea like that and they don't go the whole hog. Oh, right, I found a little trick to remind me to remember my keys. But they don't think of being polite to, treating it as a human. Because as I say, when you're putting your mind into, the little baby puts his mind into his mother, he really is wanting to get, to think like her for that point. And now, you see, in the book, The Little Book of Demons, I say, okay, you've read so far and you've got this idea that, a bad pattern in your life, you can call it a demon and you can talk to it and ask it what it's trying to do in your life and why it makes you always choose the wrong girlfriend or whatever. Now, you then think of a solution. People always say, yeah, can you give me a sort of the recipe, like 7 steps to happiness? What are the 7 things I should do in order to get rid of a demon? And I say, you're not actually treating it as a living thing, are you? What's the worst problem you can have in the world? And I can't think of anything really worse than being a parent with a real troublesome child, a problem child. It's absolutely horrific. And if a parent came to me saying, I've got a problem child, you're an expert, could you deal with this? And I said, yeah, I've spoken to him. I think I can get rid of that child for you. They'd be horrified. It's a child. It's my son, you don't just get rid of it. But if I tell them about, demons in your life and your personal demons, they will say, how do I get rid of it? And I say, no, actually, you've got to form a relationship with it. You've got to grow up with it. Find out why it's in your life, why it's doing that. And you keep falling back on want to treat it like a machine again. So you see this thing with, with my servitor, the butler, it's very easy for me just to sort of forget to thank it when things go well and treat it with respect like that. And so going back to the sort of thing we were talking about, you may think of a little biohack, which is neat, and then you gradually slip out of it. And I suggest that what you're not doing is, as it were, thanking the biohack for coming into your life and working with you. Think of it as working with you rather than a little trick you've discovered to overcome the problems of reality.
Good advice. They're slipping away from me as we speak over the last few weeks. So that's specifically good advice for me.
Yes. It's again back to the words magical thinking. It's a sort of it isn't so much the spells you do as this attitude to the world where you begin to allow it to come to life and be a living thing, which is a two-way conversation with it.
And it sounds like gratitude is a big part of that. I mean, really, like they're showing that state of gratitude actually changes your physiology, which is probably some of the basis for what you're talking about, is actually just being in that state of thankfulness, thanking your butler and thanking your biohack. And that really is being in that state of gratitude, which will change your physical state and vibration.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? Yeah, it's a sort of cumulative thing, positive feedback, and it builds up. Yeah, I hadn't thought of it in those terms, but that's definitely, I think, what is going on, and that's part of the value of it.
Yeah.
Wow. Now, I sort of diverted a bit because you asked me something quite specific, and I said, I'm just going to come back to the biohack thing because it fascinated me.
Yeah.
Can you remember what it was?
Yeah, so it was about Darren, and he wanted to remind himself to do something practical to increase his awareness or to start some of this magic that practice. I mean, nothing serious, but what would be a good thing to remind yourself to do multiple times a day to build some of this structure?
Yes. I suppose, really the answer is it depends on the person and all that, and look at your own life. But a few pointers. I think divination is quite a good thing. Yeah. It's got a sort of a place in our world, things like tarot reading and all that.
Yeah.
It's a way of bringing, So, I mean, to do a whole tarot reading several times a day is asking a bit much, but you might do one for the week or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing is just at times of uncertainty, just remove one tarot card and look at it.
I was just thinking that. Yeah, you could do it daily or at times of uncertainty.
Yes.
Just get into the habit of.
I'm sure my wife would gladly do it for me every day if I asked her. Oh yeah, she would just love it. She would be loving it.
This is my theme for the day, if you like, my message for the day.
Yeah.
Pull it out, and there's the 10 of Cups or something, and you sort of think, what's that mean, and so on and so forth. And then during the day, let's say it's the 10 of Cups. Unfortunately, I can't just rattle off the interpretation of that, but
I don't even know what that means.
Yeah, that's it. Well, sort of, read it up in the little book that comes with it and see what it says. Just have that in the back of your mind, and then look out for cupsy things during the day. You drop your cup and it breaks. You think, that's a cup event. Your children say they've won a cup at school.
That's interesting.
That's a cuppy thing,
Here,
you sort of begin to look for echoes of that through the day.
Good idea.
And it gives you it's like twisting the crystal. You've got a sort of slightly different view on the day, which makes it a bit more interesting.
So here's Darren. You just pulled this card for Darren, and here it is. On the 10 of Cups, we see a loving couple united by the bonds of true everlasting love. They not only have each other, but all they wish for in life as well, represented by the two children frolicking at their side in the small but comfortable home in the distance, surrounded by trees and water.
Well, I'm telling you ways to fall in love with the world. I'm showing you how to fall in love with the world, your environment.
And he has 2 kids in a house on a lake with the trees. Yeah, that's crazy. That's him right there.
That is pretty crazy. You are magic, sir.
Yeah. So divination, as I say, tarot is a good start because you can get them and everyone knows roughly sort of what they're about and things like that, and so it's a sort of you're not starting from nowhere. But if you start having this sort of conversation with the world, in my years of magical thinking, at the last section, I sort of talk about having I hope persuaded these skeptical readers, that magical thinking is not totally balmy and it actually is potentially a way to go forward. I say, how might one experiment, dip your toes into magical thinking? What sort of things could you do? And one of the things I say is, you're driving to work in a traffic jam and a multi-lane highway, and something's troubling you. I don't know, something's on your mind, you're worried about it. Now, in ancient times, you would look for an augury, like a bird flying past or something.
Yeah.
Well, you look around you at all these stuck cars and things. What's the augury? What can you look for? Now, you might see something. You might see a car that's weird and suggests something to you. Or it might just be like a number plate, GBH 574 or something. Yeah. And somehow that sticks out to you. You think, it's trying to tell me something. Now, of course, we're back in the interesting thing of talking to fairies. How do you actually get a message from a number plate? Well, 534, that adds up to 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, which comes to 3. Does the number 3 mean something to you? Yes, you were worrying about a sort of a love triangle, so that might be significant. Or you struggle away, no, I can't see that yet. No, you don't say it doesn't mean anything. You say, I just haven't got the message in that bit. GBH, go back home, it could mean. Right. Here, in driving here, I'm actually just trying to run away from a problem, and I'd be better to go back home. Now, you see, you've got a message by an irrational route. Now, as I've said before, this is when you bring in the reason. Is that actually a good message? And you start thinking about it, and it may, when you think about it, it may actually make a lot of sense. you realize this traffic jam is almost like a message saying, you're stuck trying to get away, where your real problem is back where you started from. It could turn out to be a life-changing message. Or else you might sort of think hard about it and think, no, I think that's fanciful. It doesn't actually make sense in my circumstance. In other words, you're using your reasoning after you've got the message, which is a good thing to do with any message, whoever it comes from. Go to the doctor and he gives you a diagnosis and he's an expert, but you should still think he might be wrong. I perhaps should get a second opinion. Use your reason when you've got the message, but don't stop yourself getting the message just because it's irrational.
That's a really good way to put it. So we talk about synchronicities a lot on the show, and our listeners email us in synchronicities, and there's some crazy stuff that happened that really show us that it doesn't seem like humans are in charge here, and I guess it seems to me like watching out for synchronicities and paying attention to them is some magical practice that fits with what you're talking about. But I guess I also want to mention as well that it seems like it brings up the universe in a virtual reality way or a simulation way. And I know that, you've talked a little bit about that as well. And maybe before I don't want to run out of time here. There's so much to talk about, but that is an interesting topic. Darren's very interested in, the digital simulation kind of thing. And was there a point in your life where magical thinking led you to think that we were living in a simulation or a virtual reality?
Yes. And it goes right back to my childhood. When we were at school in around about 1959 or so, or 1960, a guy called Professor George from Bristol University came and gave a talk to a group of us. And it was about the idea of artificial intelligence, that he reckons that time would come when they'd have computers that could think like human beings. Now, it was an interesting thing. It was fascinating. I mean, it haunted me all my life, this, because I realized, as I was a mathematician, he'd actually created an algorithm to win the argument. You see, what he said was, because all my friends around me, they were like people doing English and history and poetry and this, that, and the other. And they would say things like, yeah, but a computer could never write a poem, could it? Or could never fall in love. And what he said to everything like that was, tell me exactly what falling in love means and how you would tell if the computer had done it. And, it would sort of, and he said, you see, every time you say something like it couldn't write a poem, I'll say, tell me exactly what a poem is. And actually, if you do answer that correctly, you've told me what to program into the computer.
Exactly.
If you can't answer that exactly, I'll say it's meaningless.
Exactly.
Your word is meaningless.
Either way, they lose.
Yeah. So that now the thing was that people were fighting against him because it's a reductionist idea. They hated the idea that our brains might be like a computer. Now, what I was doing was finding that reductionism has got a reverse gear. Well, you see, the idea in those days of reincarnation was ridiculous, because how could someone die in one place and the soul, whatever that is, somehow flies through the air in space and time and lands up in another body? Why can't instruments detect it in motion and things like that? Why can't sensitive instruments see the soul leaving the body and all that type of thing? And I said, well, what occurred to me is, if my being, the part of me that I identify with, what I call me, is actually a pattern of information, then why the hell shouldn't that pattern of information turn up in other places? Yeah. Now, people say, well, the possibility of that is bigger, more than the atoms in the universe, because it's such a complex bit of information. And I'd say, yeah, but it's approximate. I'm a very different person speaking to you now because it's my breakfast time than I was when I went to bed last night. I'm a different person at different times. So that sense of me has got a lot of variations. So why shouldn't one of those senses of me turn up in another body? And after all, when you fall asleep, you have dreams, and you talk to people in your dreams. And unless it's a lucid dream, you think they're real people, which means actually they've passed the Turing test.
Yeah.
So your brain is creating a limitless number of other intelligences which pass the Turing test. It's creating other people, you see. So why shouldn't my mind reincarnate another body? So I found the reverse gear in reductionism. Instead of making all the world more and more and more mechanical, I was actually saying the magical view of the world works. We can reincarnate. And then, let me think, it must have been about sort of 10 years later, there was this two big themes were in the news. One was overpopulation. Mm-hmm. People were getting really worried. People were studying the idea of overpopulation, and we're going to have to kill off all the animals to make room for human beings. We're going to have to recycle minerals to feed us, like Soylent Green. We're going to have to recycle our corpses to make food. And then people said, the whole world could be covered over, get rid of the oceans, things, just have one big city expanding outwards. And they said that still wouldn't work, because ultimately, because of the heat generated by human beings and life, getting rid of that heat would mean the Earth would begin to glow like the sun to get that heat out into space, and eventually the surface would melt. It couldn't be sustained. And the other thing that was being talked about at the time was von Daniken. And I can't remember, one or two people writing along these lines. Stonehenge shows quite extraordinary intelligence in its design when you look into it, which was surely way beyond these Neolithic people.
Yeah.
And so they argue there must have been visitors from outer space that came and, and taught people or made them make these things. And there was a lot of stories like that. Now, I wrote this story where I said the world has got so overpopulated. How did people stay sane? Well, I thought of cinema, giving people a fantasy world, going back to that idea of, the other world, the magical thing. And then television brings it into their home. I said, if people were living in tiny little hutches inside one vast city with no nature or anything like that, the way they would stay sane would be putting a helmet on, and what I called recreational cyberneticians would scan their brains and make them act out dreams for them, which were, they would spend most of their life dreaming, wonderful dreams in nature and wonderful places and flying to the other planets, things like that. And that's how they'd stay sane. Now, you see, what happened in this story is they reached that crisis point, they couldn't go on. And so the recreational cyberneticians said, look, what we can do is create 1 million worlds, simulated worlds, and then download people's brains, their consciousness, into those worlds. So they would wake up in, and we didn't have the term virtual reality in those days, a sort of a model world. And so, of course, the politicians wanted things built into this world. You must have commitment. The religious people said, we want high morality. And they said, no, look, you're arguing amongst yourselves. The only thing we can do, I suggest, is we can scan back to the point when civilization began, the Neolithic age. Basically, we'll recreate the world as we knew it in the Neolithic age, and that's where we'll download everyone's mind to. And so they did that, you see. And then the last person to be downloaded was the guy who thought up the scheme. And he comes around and he's in the body of an old tribal sage, and you see his little children running around, and he thinks, oh my God, they've been born into this world. The real world to them is just a myth. How extraordinary. And then he thought, I want to leave a message. How can I communicate with the future? I could tell people about the real world, but then it'll just become a myth after a generation or two. I could write something down with, find something I can scratch and write, but that will fade away. And he said, the only thing I can do would be to make some great big stone monument. You see, now, I thought that was a great idea because it was like the von Daniken thing, but you didn't have to have any remains. Because the great argument against it was, well, if spaceships came and visited us, why is there nothing left over? So no space trash found in archaeological sites, things like that. Why is there absolutely no residue? And this sort of provided an answer. Intelligence came to this world because it was downloaded from another reality, and so that was my first thing. That was about 1970, where I wrote the idea that the world we're living in might actually be what we now call a virtual reality.
Yeah.
And then about another 10 years later, the idea occurred. I came up with this argument that, scientists are beginning to talk about the theory of everything. They could find the equations which would reproduce, which would completely explain the universe we live in. Now, my idea was, well, if that's so, how would you test that? You wouldn't be able to get a zillion tons of matter to sort of make it happen. You would have to model it in a computer. Okay, so you run the model, and sure enough, there's a big bang, and galaxies form and everything, just like the real thing. Terrific. So we've proved science is right. And the religious people say, no. It takes God to make life. So you've got to leave the thing running and look at all the sort of Earth-like planets until you find one where life is evolving. Right, okay, we've proved it now, life. And then the religious people said, yes, but those are just like animals. They're not human. They haven't got God's soul in them. They're not in the... And so you've got to keep running the thing until you have a Garden of Eden, and then there are hominids and all that type of thing. Now, and then you've shown... Now, I said, if that could happen, how would you judge when you really had reproduced, the world as we know it? It would be when they become intelligent enough to start having their own scientific theories and themselves deciding that, finding the theory of everything and start modeling their own world. Now, in that case, you would get a sort of chain of worlds. There would be so many virtual realities that what's the chance we just happen to be living in the first one?
Yeah.
It becomes vanishingly small. So I said probabilistically, it's more likely we're living in a virtual reality than in some original material reality, which it's all supposed to be based on.
So what do you? I mean, you think? What do you think?
I call that. Yeah, can I just say? I call that Johnston's paradox.
Okay.
And in the early 70s, the early days of the internet, people were discussing Johnston's paradox as an idea, and that was before the Matrix or any of that, subsequent stuff. So I like to think that I set a little ripple out there.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. I mean, now, what do you think nowadays when there's all kinds of theories about simulation and digital universe? I mean, it's quite it's blown up quite a bit.
Yeah, that's it. And I haven't followed it because, I tend to go on to something else that interests me.
Yeah,
but I do think it is a very good magical paradigm, let's use that word, because the book I wrote about it, which was in about 1986, and Words Made Flesh, by then I'd given up trying to persuade people, that we really are in a virtual reality. Instead, I said, if we begin to experience again, I didn't have the word virtual, computer modeled realities like computer games and things like that, it'll begin to make sense. People begin to think, why aren't we living in a virtual reality? You see, to me, it's that Occam's razor thing.
Yeah.
The reason that the rational view of the universe is so powerful is if I say that I had a spiritual experience and spoke to God, and they say, but we could put a chemical in your brain or stick an electrode in your brain and give you exactly the same experience. Occam's razor says, well, probably then experiences of God are actually that thing happening in your brain, rather than having sort of two versions of the same thing. You know, one is God and the other's in your brain. They'll say, well, actually, I think it's all just in the brain. Now, what I said is, if people begin to experience better and better virtual realities, after a while they'll begin to think, well, why do we need to have a different idea about our own reality? It's much simpler just to think that all realities are virtual. And so that was the argument I put in Words Made Flesh, you know, that whether it's true or not, I think the future generations are going to begin to think of this world as an information construct. And I liked it because I said, you know, there's the matter version of reality, there's the energy version of reality, and I'm completing the Trinity by saying there's a information version of reality. And now the thing that I know the people who write about it now have probably gone way before on the science of it. But what I did in Words Made Flesh is I looked at how it would affect the world if people thought that was true. And so I sort of looked at, you know, what would it do to religion? The idea that this is a virtual reality. You could build a religion on the idea that it was God who constructed this virtual reality. In other words, you know, it doesn't mean the end of religion. It just means different types of religion. What would it do to society? And I can't remember the arguments now, but the sort of thing I said is, can imagine a time in the future when someone does the sort of thing we've been talking about. He goes into the garden, and before he picks a cabbage, he thanks the cabbage for having grown and being about to nourish him. Because, you see, he sees the cabbage and himself as just two aspects of one whole reality. Connected, yeah. And therefore, he's going to respect it. It's feeding him. So I explore many different things, how, you know, one very interesting one for me is magic. To the rationalist, to do a little ritual, say it's a love ritual, and you do something with Venus, you know, and perfumes of Venus and this, that, and the other, and you do it when Venus is rising sky, they'll say, how absolutely stupid. There's no connection at all between that lump of matter millions of miles out in space called Venus and this stuff which you're burning and your love life. They're all totally separate. Now, the interesting thing is, you know, they're independent in computing terms. Now, the interesting thing is that making things random and independent is very expensive in a virtual reality. You can make a very complex space like the Mandelbrot set, hugely complex. You could look at a little bit of that through a magnifying glass, and you could never work out where it's come from because it's just so complex. You would need a huge computer to go backwards from a piece of the Mandelbrot set to the original equation to work it out because it's so complex. But in a computer, you can make something as complex as the world we're living in, but it would all come from a simple set of equations. So everything is connected. Now, if you really were going to make something totally random happen, randomness is very difficult to generate in a computer. In fact, they have to use tricks, you know, sort of pushing the chip to its limits where it begins to break down, you know, and do non-physical things or whatever, or rather, you know, the computing breaks down. So the idea that when you shuffle a pack of cards, it's totally independent of what's happening in the world around you is dead obvious in a material world, but in an information world, it's almost impossible. Everything would be connected. And then the question then is interesting is, why can't we see the connections? Why are they so difficult to find? And that's to do with complexity. But I like that because it sort of turned the tables, you know.
Yeah.
Instead of having to explain the magical world and justify it. You have to justify why ever it would be possible to have a world where things happened randomly.
Yeah, exactly. Is that where the chaos and the chaos magic comes in then? Or how is that related?
It might, because my relationship with chaos magic is not sort of direct in the way that Pete Carroll's was. It was, I wrote these books and put out these ideas, and then I found that there was a group of people who sort of knew my stuff, and they were calling themselves chaos magicians. So it fed into it, if you like. It was an amazing experience for me. You know, I'd done Thunder Squeak, and I was sticking the pages together and take them around little shops, you know, and then finally they hadn't sold this, that, and the other. And then I got this invitation to out of the blue to come to Leeds University to speak to the Leeds University Occult Society. And I thought, wow, you know, I wish there'd been an occult society in universities in my day. So I went up there and said hello, you know, and I went into this hall, and the man stood up and said, "Tonight's speaker needs no introduction." My jaw sagged. What? Looking at it wasn't hundreds of people. It was maybe 100 people or 60 people or something. But I need no introduction. And I realized that all these people who read my stuff.
Wow.
And it was amazing. So, and they, you know, Leeds and that area was sort of where the chaos current really flowered. I know it had its origins in London, if you really take it back to Pete Carroll and the people in Stoke Newington, I think it was. But it was really in the north of England that it took off, and I think that's when it got its name. And so, yeah, my ideas are sort of fed into them. And so, you know, I was invited to come and speak to the Chaos conferences, and I was initiated into the IoT, and used to go to their, take part in their wonderful, amazing conferences they held in Austria and other places. So I very much, identify with the chaos current, but I'm not like a leading light or an expert in the current itself, you know, and what I don't know what exactly the themes are at present, what's going on now.
Yeah.
You know, I said I'm quite out of touch down in South Africa, but it's lovely to hear signs of sort of ideas which I toyed with, coming alive elsewhere, and particularly when they're useful in other people's lives. That's just fantastic.
Absolutely.
Another ripple.
Absolutely. Well,
yeah.
Well, this has been awesome, Lionel. We'd like to really thank you for getting up early and postponing your breakfast, and giving us 80 or 90 minutes here, some good content, and this has been great. We'll have to look at doing this again sometime down the road.
Well, time has flown, I must admit. I am hungry, but I hadn't realized that we've got to well over an hour, haven't we?
Yeah, it's crazy, eh?
Yeah.
It's good.
You're good people to talk to. I wish you lived next door.
Yes. Oh, man. Yeah, it's just been really fascinating. Yeah, I loved learning about that, and probably follow your work a little closer. And before we go, you got to tell us about your new YouTube channel and what you're doing there with that, and we'll point people in that direction. Yes. Yeah,
it's been the YouTube channel has been terribly quiet for about more than a month now. Okay. Now, talking of synchronicities, put it down to the fact that I just completed editing for publication my Abramelin diary of 40 years ago. And while I was doing that, my very reliable Mac system totally packed up and had to be rebuilt twice. And just as I was getting it back together, I had the first burglary we've had here ever, and they took nothing but my office computer with all my stuff in it. Then, of course, I went to the back, the time capsule backup, and was told it was corrupted. And I bought very expensive software trying to get my system back alive again, and haven't yet managed it. And then I had a skin cancer. I've never had cancer; just doesn't run in our family. It's not our sort of thing. But we go in for strokes. But diagnosed with skin cancer, and so I had my wound going septic, and I had to have an operation. And my cooker, which is in the place where I do my work and in the place where I send out those videos, the cooker, the oven caught fire and burnt out. So I've had quite a chain of disasters recently, and it's very easy to ascribe it to the fact that the demons of Abramelin have leaked out.
Wow. Or the YouTube trolls.
Yeah. So I'm going to have to, I've got a few ideas. I'll get that going again. I haven't yet completely rebuilt my system, but I have got a computer working down there. Mm.
I used RStudio when I deleted a bunch of stuff one time. It was for Mac too.
Oh yeah.
What did you call it, Darren? RStudio?
RStudio, when I deleted those 6 episodes accidentally.
Oh gosh, yes, yeah. Yeah, that's it. It was obviously powerful stuff, The best stuff gets the universe rebels against it.
That's right, exactly.
Yeah. So just on your question, I've got this channel. It's called the Ramsey Dukes YouTube channel, and there's now more than 50 little videos in there. And it began just as providing some stuff for my niece who was going to do a workshop. I said, I'll do 6 little videos, 5-minute ones, and you got some material you could pull up. And she was very apologetic. She hadn't done it. I said, well, I'll put it on Facebook. And I put it on Facebook. And as I was uploading the second one, which took about 15 minutes, 4 people were already looking at the first one. And then people started saying, will you have a YouTube channel? Because then it's easier to share. And so it snowballed from there.
Nice. Well, I think that's a good platform for you to put out your work. Yeah, it'll be good.
Yeah. Okay.
Right on. Well, we'll link to that. Yeah. We'll link to that in the show notes and all that, and we'll send you a copy when we get this thing out. And thanks for your time, and have a great breakfast.
Have a good day.
Yeah, well, it's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Lionel.
I'm going to hit that red button now.
Okay, take care.
Ciao for now.
Bye.
Bye.